Hello, my name is Josh. I'm a Bib Studies major here at Jessup, and I'm 24 years old. As far as spiritual formation goes, I often harken back to being in the youth group at my old church back in Sacramento. I was in seventh grade at the time, so it was around 2012. Yeah, as far as being formed, I would say that, actually being taught about good conduct, and there's a lot of emphasis on praxis, not so much that we need to do, but that's just the impression that I was under. It's that, you know I need to be more humble, I need to be more gentle, I need to be more patient. I need to improve in these areas, right? So that's my experience with spiritual formation from being a young kid. More recently, it was, well, as recently as, we'll go back to late 2018. So, back in that time, I decided that I was going to join the Navy as a chaplain. And I had really put off doing it for the longest time. In 2020 is when I really decided, like, okay, I went into the recruiter's office, I told them I had already taken my ASVAB, and I was getting ready to sign the paperwork, but I was a little too honest on it. I told them that I had, some mental health things going on, so they disqualified me. 2 years later, I ended up at Jessup. I can safely say that the reason I got disqualified from the Navy was, one, I was too honest on my paperwork, and two, I like to think God was shutting that door because I was starting to make it more about me. I said I wanted to join the Navy originally as a chaplain, and I did. But much later, as I was actually getting ready to join up, in my head, I had this plan, right? I had this plan. I'm going to go in as a corpsman, a medic. I'm going to do all this stuff. I'm going to make all this money. I'm going to have all these experience. And then when I get out, I'm going to go into the medical field. I'm going to make all this money. I'm going to be doing just fine. It was about me. It wasn't about how I could bring glory to God. It wasn't about how I could benefit others. It was about me. And I think in hindsight, God definitely shut that door because he knew that that was going to happen. He knew I was going to make it about myself. Fast forward 2 years, I officially started at Jessup in the fall of 22. And, just looking back to me then and me now, there's been a lot of growth, and it's not by my own effort. Of course, I, studied and read the Word and, did all these assignments and whatnot. But as far as heart transformation goes, there's been so much. Because my goals were reoriented back to chaplaincy, but more specifically just pastoral ministry as a whole. Because when I first started here, I wanted to be a prison chaplain because I thought that was challenging, and I thought I could grow a lot from that. Now, at this point, I had already experienced what getting my direction changed quite abruptly felt like. So I was more or less I had to be very careful about having my plan set in stone. This is what I want to do, but I'll go where I'm sent. And as far as pastoral ministry goes, it was only recently that I started feeling the nudge towards the office of pastor. And that freaked me out because I didn't understand, or I immediately went to lead pastor. And I was freaking out about it. I was thinking, well, pastors have a lot of pressure put on them. They have a target on their back. There's a lot more responsibilities that they hold versus chaplains. I don't know if I can handle that. I don't know if I want to handle that. I don't want to handle that. Just this, that, and the other, just bouncing around. But I have to be flexible. I have to be able to say, I will go where I'm sent, even if I don't like where I'm sent. And, there's just been so much that I've learned here. There's just been so much heart transformation. There's been a lot of pain. And there's been a lot of growing up that I've had to do. There's been a lot of I told you so moments. Not that God says I told you so, but it's more of like a me saying it to myself, realizing that there was realizing that God is speaking to me in these was speaking to me in those moments, but I wasn't listening. And that's why I often say that 2018 to 2021 was kind of my worst year because I wasn't pursuing God. I wasn't pursuing Him as adamantly as I probably should have. I hesitate to use the word should, but as a Christian, that is a word that we can use, especially when we're talking about pursuing God. We should be doing that. That's kind of the whole point. So, I can safely say that from 2018 to 2021, I wasn't actively pursuing God. It wasn't until I got to Jessup that I was humbled, more or less. Because in 2021 was when I started getting a little more serious about my faith, I think. I'd be watching these YouTube videos about these Christian YouTube channels, and I felt like I was getting sharpened by them, and I was, as much as possible. And, I always try to be gentle and try to be humble about, my approach and what have you. And I was under the impression that I could sort of teach the word, not in the same way that a pastor or, a professor does, but I'm like thinking, this is pretty simple. I feel like I could teach this, at a very low, like youth level sort of thing. And then I got to Jessup and realized, oh my goodness, there is so much that I do not know. And this wasn't discouraging for me. It was an eye-opener. All right, I realized I needed to be formed a lot more. And this is definitely a hindsight thing because my first semester, there was a very heavy emphasis on being known. And not someone just knowing your name or your major, knowing you. And like I said, this is definitely a hindsight thing because I've recently come to a much broader conclusion, much more narrow conclusion than being known. I've gotten to the point where I think I understand what that means now. 2.5 years later. Being known is so much more of it, like I said, than someone knowing your name or how you like to eat your steak. It's them knowing where you fail and how they can love you in the midst of that, or how they can help you improve in the midst of that. And this was only something I started thinking about or applying last semester, so in the spring or the fall of 2024. So it took me 2 years to fully grasp that subject. And that's not me saying like, oh, I should have gotten it sooner, because I had to be formed. And I had to realize that there's so much more to the Christian life than just reading the Word and applying the principles. There's a lot of personal transformation that needs to take place. You can apply the principles until you're blue in the face. But if you're not allowing those principles to transform you, then what are you doing?